Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the first day of National Clean Energy Week for a discussion on decarbonizing Florida's economy with two of the state's most important employers, Walmart and Siemens. My name is Ryan Evans, and I'm the Executive Director for Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, or CICE for short. CICE is a national network of 1,300 chambers of commerce and economic development organizations. We were founded by chamber executives and a good amount of our staff works in the chamber industry or economic development industries. As an organization, we work with business and economic focused associations to amplify and advance the clean energy economy while highlighting business leadership in the areas of clean energy, climate action, and resilience. Climate and clean energy are now everyday conversations in the business and policy world. Solar and wind are now the cheapest forms of new electric generation. And in the next 5 years or so, data suggests that it will be more expensive to operate existing coal or natural gas power plants than building new solar or wind farms. Further, the commitment by auto manufacturers to produce electric vehicles has jumped tremendously in the last year. And with that, we will need to build out a massive and robust electric vehicle infrastructure network across the country. Clearly, we are already in the midst of an energy transformation and taking positive steps on climate action. This is an important discussion in Florida in particular, and we are proud to be partnering today with the Florida Race to Zero campaign, which was launched earlier this year to amplify what Florida cities are doing to become net zero. As I mentioned, we are joined by executives from both Walmart, the largest employer in Florida, which has announced significant goals for net zero emissions across its global operations, and Siemens, a leader in power generation technology with a significant presence in Florida, and which has also committed to some impressive carbon reduction goals as well. Both companies are clearly leading by example and driving the clean energy sector forward, not only in Florida, but across the country. We will discuss their corporate plans for decarbonization today, policies and actions for governments to assist them, and why taking such action is good for business and for the communities they operate in. Now I'd like to introduce our two panelists today and ask that they give some background into their company's efforts towards decarbonizing and climate action. The first is Bree Saxe. She is the Vice President and Head of US Government Affairs for Siemens. She leads the government affairs for Siemens US with responsibility to shape and drive a robust legislative and policy agenda in support of the company's business priorities across infrastructure, manufacturing, transportation, economic development, and workforce. She's also a local government veteran in Florida, having formerly served as the Chief of Staff for Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. Bree, with that, I will turn the time over to you for a minute, and then we'll get to Erica as soon as you have let us off.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. Pleased to join you all today as we kickstart the Race to Zero. So as Ryan said, I'd love to introduce Siemens for those of you on the line. We're a global technology company steeped in innovation across infrastructure, manufacturing, and transportation. Now, having been in the US for over 160 years, we're currently a technology partner for over 100 cities across the country. And it's really motivating to see the locally inspired climate and resiliency action plans coming out of the Sunshine State. Now, Siemens is proud to be the first global industrial company to commit 100% carbon neutrality by 2030. We're already more than halfway there as of 2020. Siemens is an active supporter of the Paris Climate Agreement, like many of the Florida mayors who have joined on to the Race to Zero in Florida. And we'll continue to do our part to reduce emissions, foster healthy communities, and really ensure that we're preparing for a changing tomorrow. Most recently, we've actually stepped up our agreements, extending our commitment to decarbonization of all Siemens buildings and our manufacturing facilities to achieve a net zero emissions by 2030 and achieve a net zero carbon by 50 for our supply chain. We have over 20,000 suppliers in the US alone. And even just to give you a snapshot globally, 50,000 vehicles in our about 20% in 2030. The world's most profound challenges, leveraging what we call the convergence of digitalization. So think digital tools, hardware, software, and technology at the intersection with sustainability. Our portfolio and know-how really positions Siemens to not only meet our own ambitious targets, but really it informs how we support our customers worldwide implementing sustainability strategies, whether that's customers in industry, cities, at the county level, really looking at sustainability goals that create benefits and for society at large. In 2020, we helped reduce or abate over 150 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So look forward to talking with you all more today. Thanks, Ryan. Back to you.
Thanks, Bree. Eric Brewer is also with us today. Eric is the Senior Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations for Walmart. He's spent significant time as an advocate at the federal, state, and local level, which makes him a very good advocate or a very good contributor to this conversation, having worked at all levels of government for major corporations. Eric is also a Floridian with deep ties to the state, so we're pleased to have him with us today. And Eric, if you could kind of start us off with a conversation about Walmart as well, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure thing, Ryan. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity. Really appreciate the chamber letting me know this was possible. So one of the things that I wanted to do today was just first off, give a little bit of an overview as far as Walmart's commitment to the conversation and the topic, but also just talk a little bit about the company and kind of a little behind the curtain as far as how we got here. So just speaking of Florida specifically, we have 387 retail units or stores and clubs inside the state. It's our second largest behind Texas. So very significant presence within the Sunshine State. We have a little over 114,000 associates. So there's not too many towns or communities that we don't touch in some way within state borders. One of the things I think it's always really important to understand on the topic of sustainability, regeneration, and Walmart is while this would at first seem to be more of a conversation regarding emergency operations, bear with me. But when Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005, that was also coincidentally when I was hired a few months before that at Walmart. And I would tell you from folks who had been with the company before, during, and immediately thereafter, there was a significant cultural change inside the company headed by our CEO at the time, Lee Scott, in the impact of our response had to the area in the Gulf Coast where Katrina struck. This started to sort of have an amplifier effect in other areas where we felt like our scale could really do something more positively than simply kind of focused on what the business was focused on that particular day or that business cycle. And so sustainability also was sort of birthed that year in 2005. And since that time, I think the single biggest and most important thing for folks outside the company to understand is our sustainability effort lives within the business. Now, what do I mean by that? It's not sort of a silo where you sort of have the sustainability department versus the accounting department and legal department. All facets of the business are accountable and evaluated as to what is driving towards sustainability goals. We are huge believers that if it's not measurable, you're not accountable for it. And so to that degree, when I get into sort of some of the numbers, it's always tough when I'm talking to folks about Walmart because some of our numbers are just so darn big. And it kind of comes across a little odd to some folks. And so I want, when I go through some of the data, to think a little bit more about the process. And that's why I have this little preamble, because I want to make sure that it's sort of highlighted that all of this is an effort by the company writ large, not simply a dedicated team, as wonderful as they are, within our sustainability leadership. Our sustainability EVP reports directly to our CEO. And in that sense, you couldn't be more accountable as far as what we're doing. Michaela, I think if you have the little video queued up, I'm always a big fan of a little cartoon to sort of start things off. So just for about a minute and a half, this is a nice little overview, and then I'll do my level best to try to flesh it out a little bit with some more details. Michaela, thanks.
As part of our commitment to addressing climate change, we've been working hard to reduce emissions from our operations for over a decade. While we've made strong progress, the urgency around climate change has prompted us to set an even more ambitious path. That's why Walmart is targeting zero emissions across our global operations by 2040. This is how we plan to get there. First, energy efficiency. We've already transitioned nearly all of our international stores, clubs, DCs, and parking lots to LED technology, and we'll continue to find new ways to use less energy. Second, renewable energy. We aim to harvest enough wind, solar, and other energy sources to power our facilities with 100% renewable energy by 2035. Third, equipment. We'll transition to cooling equipment that uses low-impact refrigerants and convert our heating systems to electric, allowing them to run on renewable sources. Finally, transportation. We plan to zero out the emissions of all of our vehicles, including long-haul trucks. We'll do this by transitioning to electric and hydrogen-fueled vehicles, scaling charging stations at all of our facilities, and more. Zero emissions by 2040. Every day counts. This is our path forward, guided by what is good for our business, our people, and our planet.
What we're basically trying to underscore at the top end is sort of what I said initially in regards to sort of a 15-year journey, and specifically the sustainability of what it means to be a regenerative company is focused on 4 particular areas within supply chains. So climate, nature, waste, and people. And our focus on those 4 areas has strengthened our business and communities in very measurable ways. First off, we divert over 80% of our waste from landfills and incineration globally. We power over 1/3 of our global operations with renewable energy. We sell more sustainable products in more sustainable packaging, like our Time and True jeans, which are made from recycled polyester, Equate reading glasses made from plastics recovered from the oceans, and more. We kind of term this our shared value approach. We're really trying to sort of help solve for business and societal needs by driving sort of a system-wide change, leading through business interventions and complemented with philanthropy and collaboration, most importantly with third parties. So let me talk specifically about some of our goals that we have publicly committed to, and I'll start a little the furthest out in 2040, and then I'll get closer to where we are now. So our goal is target zero emissions by 2040. We want to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2035. We want to avoid 1 gigaton of greenhouse gas emissions across our supply chain by 2030. For the great question, hey, Eric, what's 1 gigaton? It's roughly equivalent to taking 211 million cars off the road for a year. Now that is, just to flesh that out for a second, that is absolutely, Project Gigaton is absolutely focused on working with our supply chain, where we've had over 3,000 of our suppliers and vendors join us in this effort. And that's how that particular number, that goal is being focused. With the Walmart Foundation, we've helped to protect or manage or restore 50 million acres of land, about 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. And then the last 3 goals that we've been very public with is source 20 key commodities more sustainably by 2025. So for instance, tuna, palm oil, coffee. Create zero waste in our operations in the US and Canada by 2025. And then lastly, achieve 100% private brand, recyclable, reusable, or industrially compostable packaging by 2025. So what's the progress so far? Some of the items I'd love to highlight. Walmart is powered over 36% by our renewable energy. And according to the solar and wind associations we work with, we have bought more wind and installed more solar than any in the US in 2019, which is the last year we have data for, don't have it for 2020. We made CDP's A-list for climate and supplier engagement leaderboard in 19 and 20. We continue to make progress on our commitment to source at least the 20 key commodities more sustainably by 2025. For example, all coffee sourced for Walmart US and Sam's Club private brands is certified sustainable through third-party groups, such as Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance Certified, or UTZ. And as of 2020, an estimated 62% of our private brand packaging is recyclable, reusable, or industrially compostable based on supplier reports, putting us well within our reach of our goal of 100% by 2025. And the last two items sort of mentioned is we have diverted around 81% of our waste from landfills and incineration globally. We also recycle a little over 375 million pounds of plastic film, rigid plastics globally. I think the thing that strikes me when you kind of go through some of this data is when you sort of lead off by talking about how it lives within the business, is how, while there is a clear ripple effect and intention to have an impact globally on the earth and on the communities, it's sort of the maximization of resources, which is simply good business. And I think the degree to which the success of our sustainability efforts to get in every nook and cranny of the business is based upon the intention to maximize the resources we have and conserve. And that sort of conservation of packaging, of fuel, everything that goes in to sort of the greater goal is something that has simply become a part of the culture of the company. And I think that is probably the single most important aspect of this conversation for us, is this sort of journey as we've matured and learned. So with that, happy to circle back and look forward to having some good conversation. And if I don't know an answer today, because I certainly am not an expert to the nth degree, I'll do my level best if I can't get it on the call to follow up and get it afterward if possible. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Thanks to you both, honestly. And as both of you were talking, it actually made me bump up a question that I had that I wanted to ask later on. I probably have 2 or 3 others that I'm bumping up because of comments you made to start us out, which is great. But I want to kind of come back to what Eric just said, and I'll pitch it to Bree first, and then we'll kind of come back to Eric. But in the case of Siemens, not only are you a good corporate citizen in terms of your goals for your emissions reductions, carbon reduction, but you also are in the business of clean energy to some degree. I mean, you have lots of different units that touch on that with power generation, electric vehicles. And specifically where I'm going to go, though, is yes, you have the business line, and maybe you can even talk a little bit about how you impact the clean energy economy as a company. But can you both also, and I'm going to start with Bree and then we'll turn to Eric, but talk a little bit more about that business case for sustainability, clean energy, and climate action. It's there. We hear all the time that renewables are a cheaper form of energy than anything else now. But talk to us just a little bit about that business case, not just the feel-good environmental or emotional case for clean energy and climate.
Sure. So, I'd say a couple things. When I mentioned earlier, Siemens, if you look at our core focus around infrastructure, transportation, and manufacturing, when you think of critical infrastructure, or you think of some of the vital industries that keep the economy going, they are also significant consumers of energy, buildings, right? The federal government has very ambitious energy efficiency goals as the biggest user of energy when you think about the installation of buildings. So when we talk about the business case, whether it's manufacturing, again, buildings, transportation, I mean, the common thread through all of that is really how to do things more efficiently, effectively, more agile. We're seeing in the energy space kind of the shift to prosumers, right? So when a consumer can decide when they want to get their energy and how. And so through all of that, it's about technology and the digital tools. We'll talk a little bit about electrification later on of transportation and transit systems. But I think part of the business case is, we've talked about the societal impacts, but it is the financial model of, there's concerns of maybe making the upfront investments, but ultimately you find the cleaner, the more efficiency energy, and you'll see whether it's getting products to market quicker in the manufacturing environment or through the future, sort of utility bill. If you think about some of the capital improvements that are made, you can finance those future savings to make the investments to have smarter, more energy efficient buildings. So, Siemens, we launched in 2015 our sustainability goals and have continually seen that steady increase of public and private sector customers looking at how to develop their sustainability roadmap. We had a program called the City Performance Tool. Orlando was one of our cities that participated in that. And we really took a data-driven approach. And what are the right technologies? What do you deploy? What's the path to meet these bold goals? And whether that's, again, all across the built environment, transportation, et cetera. And so at Siemens, we're really looking at what that, as Eric said, it's kind of embedded in every business and every function of the company. And we're also looking at how to do that from a customer's perspective so that they don't need to go to every different entity of Siemens. But if you're a hospital, how can we provide the healthcare that low emission, ultrasound, CT scanners, MRIs, but how are we making sure the labs are energy efficient? But the sort of full suite of Siemens technologies, the financing and the expertise, right? For some of the maybe smaller or more medium-sized, let's say, manufacturers, even the thought of bringing a plant offline or a facility offline, how you make these sort of upgrades. So we're really looking at taking our skill and know-how coupled with our energy efficient technologies to really support customers.
That's great. Thank you, Bree. Eric, do you want to take a stab at the business case?
Yeah, I think a couple things occurs to me. So first, on sort of the traditional sort of profit and loss statement kind of business look at this subject, I think sort of the virtuous cycle is what comes to mind. Is that, and I mentioned this earlier, when you talk about sort of conserving or maximizing resources, when you more efficiently, I'll use the example that's been out for a number of years, but when detergent started getting a much stronger, you didn't have to use an entire scoop. You could use a smaller amount because it was stronger. The hard, it was a learning curve when you first got it. You kept wanting to put more and more in. But at any rate, when you started with that concentration, the virtuous cycle begins that you don't have to have as large a box. You can have a smaller box or a different packaging material to contain a smaller amount that is more efficient in use. You then can ship more of those containers in a truck to a store. That truck has less truck trips because you don't have to have, you can do maybe 1.5 trucks that used to do what 3 trucks had to do. And so that is a very small example of what gets written across the business in how you package, how you reuse. That starts to have a ripple effect within the business. That shows up on a P&L. And the best possible thing you can ever do to sell a business on a new effort is to give them a profit and loss direct impact. And that is a learning curve that, again, this is not sort of a public relations campaign. This is a business model. And I'm not here sitting here telling you, oh, boom, we got it like that. No, it's a journey. But once you sort of do that homework and get over that hill to begin with, then the long runway becomes much more effective. The second thing occurs to me is I simply think you have a consumer these days who is much more educated and sophisticated and much more demanding to know why you do X, Y, and Z. And again, bear with me on this. One of the challenges in retail, whether it's for Walmart, other large companies, or even small retailers, is that almost every single customer in this world, but certainly in the United States or developed countries, expects to have, if not the lowest price that provides some value in their hand as they look at their phone, kind of what we refer to as the endless aisle. They can shop for whatever they want, get the value they think is right. When they order it, if it doesn't show up today, by golly, it better show up tomorrow, and they can't feel like they're paying for the product. That's a lot of pressure on a retail business to figure out, okay, how do we match the reality of the market? And sustainability and the path towards regeneration has helped significantly in figuring out where can we adjust this cost or that cost to try to get to a new profitability based upon the market, based upon customer expectation. That's just reality of the economics of it. And so to that degree, it's really it's been extremely helpful in focusing all areas of the company in delivering value, not only for the customer, but through our supply chain.
That's great. I might have to steal that example of the packaging in the future, because I love the idea that it starts really small, right? It's the easiest of things, but if better and more efficient packaging or delivery of product actually reduces, in the end, the number of truck runs, for example, that's a huge reduction in emissions. I mean, where does most of our emissions across this country come from? But from autos, automobiles on the road. And so that's a really good example of starting in one place and in another, and I appreciate that. I'm gonna take a little different shift on this, and Bree, I'm gonna push this to you first and ask Eric maybe a little different version of this when it's his turn. But I want to focus on the evolution that companies have undergone when it comes to how brands prioritize clean energy options when they're looking to site new facilities or expand existing ones. A recent study commissioned by our organization, CICE, recently showed that communities that are committed to net zero are increasingly becoming more attractive places for companies looking to site locations or expand. You even, Bree, just a moment ago, talked about all of the 160, I believe it was, cities that you work with, and seeing all the different carbon reduction or climate-related clean energy procurement plans that are out there now. Why are these commitments communities are making in the clean energy and net zero space so important to Siemens?
Sure. Well, look, we've got about 50,000 employees across the U.S. and a presence in every state in America. And there's a variety of factors that go in, as you point out, where we set up operations, but also where we strategically invest. I think many of you here today will be familiar, clearly, access to talent as one of them, proximity to customers or supply chain, really looking at local ecosystems that help spur competitiveness and drive. And we've heard when I was in Orlando, when we were attracting some headquarters to the region from a public perspective, you also want, what are those selling points to your region? And then the last point, clearly, which I'll expand on, but is really about reliable and efficient infrastructure across the board. So whether you might frame it in climate or you might frame it in resiliency. But either way, having that strong access to supply chain. I know we've strategically made investments, access to ports for exporting goods. We've also looked at access to rail spurs and have literally been out measuring load and capacity of the rail line to ship very large scale pieces of equipment to our customers. Recently, we announced our intention to expand U.S. manufacturers in direct response to the rapid market growth and being fueled by the policies of the Biden-Harris administration federally. And so how we look at accelerating EV charging production is actually one on the docket right now, where we're going through site selection. And I think access to clean energy, strong infrastructure, whether it's getting our employees to and from, just a variety of options, but just kind of a snapshot, I think, of the lens that we look and prioritize where we set up operations.
Very helpful, thank you. And that's such an important look into those operations, and especially the ways that you do work with the municipalities too. So that's great. Eric, a similar question. Walmart obviously is not expanding their construction the way that you did maybe 10 years ago. You're a dramatically different company now in the sense that you've built out all across America. You're probably still adding stores, but not nearly the same level as before. But how important, I guess my question will be a little bit different in the sense, but how important is your relationship with local governments when trying to achieve your own corporate goals? I mean, you mentioned across all of your business lines and, net zero goals for the entire company and clean energy procurement goals for the entire country. But particularly as it applies to that, how does that really fit in with that relationship with the local government to help you either achieve or maybe even hinder what your efforts are?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the challenges we've had over the past 5 years or almost 6 years, so it clearly predates COVID, was we significantly slowed down the increase of our fleet or of our store or club construction. So a significant change in how we invested our own dollars from, instead of having new construction, you had a good portion going to remodeling or refreshing the stores or clubs that already exist. And obviously quite a bit of investment onto our online capabilities. And I think the kind of way to stretch this out a little bit, and COVID did nothing but simply amplify what I'm about to say, is that the challenge for us from a business standpoint is not to get you to shop our business model. It's for us to change our business model to how you want to shop. So it's not sort of I shop bricks and mortar this way versus online this way. It's one way. And you can either come to the store or go online or do whatever you do. And so to answer your question, when we used to have so much construction, there was regular interaction on a weekly basis, it seemed like, certainly on a very consistent basis with municipalities in regards to land use and what we were doing with new stores. We still have on that very specific opportunity, some interactions when it comes to remodels, but in that case, it tends to be very administrative. Very rarely do we need to go before elected bodies for, new brick or whatever it might be to sort of refresh those stores. And so I think, to the topic at hand, depending upon what's going on in a specific state or municipality, when there is leadership from that municipality on a particular topic, so for instance, recharging stations to go along with perhaps a gas station that may exist, or if there's something being remodeled, gives us the opportunity to sort of refresh that own relationship in regards to why we want to pursue some aspect of our overall goals. But I'm not going to use the word now. It needs to be specific to the market demand to a good extent. And I think that ultimately needs to come from the municipality or from the state as far as their prioritization. I'll back up for a second. One, I think the tough things that I think we needed to learn early on was we had to partner with others to get some insight and learnings from what we didn't know. But one of the things that we absolutely understood, and I think this is probably applicable across the board, is that we need to control what we can control first and how that fits into our own business, and then kind of expand out from that. And I think to that extent, Ryan, your question makes me think of the happy circumstance when there is leadership in a municipality or a city that overlaps with something we're trying to do. Frankly, to your point, I think the scale of Walmart sometimes becomes sort of overwhelming and you get sort of numbed out with the numbers. But in this case, we worked quite a bit with the U.S. Conference of Mayors to try to sort of, if we're not if back in the day we didn't pilot something 10 years ago in one city, it was to try to diversify what cities we were piloting something in to learn, and then see how we can expand from there. But I guess I would end with simply saying the biggest motivation we have in this space is identifying opportunities or partnerships where interests overlap between what the public sector and what we would like to do. And so in that sense, from our energy department to our sustainability folks, we're all ears as far as new opportunities.
Fantastic. This one's going to be sort of an open-ended question a little bit, because I'm not sure where I'm going to have you. Well, I want you to take this where you want to take this, but looking at the state of Florida, resilience is obviously a very big discussion. Climate action is a big discussion. You both have significant presence in that state. My question is, again, sort of open-ended, but if you're looking from the policy, whether it's public policy or regulatory policy, either things that have happened already or things that you would like to see happen to help you advance your goals and or just improve the conditions with which to do business in the state of Florida based on this growing climate necessary situation that we're in, especially again relating to Florida. It's an ongoing important discussion. When the governor of Florida announces a $1 billion program to the legislature to help fight climate and be more resilient as a state, it's a big deal. And so I'm just kind of curious what you see in Florida either happening or maybe that you'd love to see happen in order to help you be a better business partner to this to the state of Florida. Rhea, if you want to start it, or Erica, whoever wants to jump in first.
I'm happy to take a stab at this. So I lived in Florida, not during the time of Andrew, thank goodness I wasn't in South Florida, but I was here in Florida at the time. And again, not an expert on this, but from what I can tell, and I, transparency, I'm the lead for Walmart, our emergency operations. The amount of storms that have obviously kicked up here the last few years and hit other states along the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic versus Florida, it certainly seems like what Florida started after Andrew, and I believe had revisited a few times, either at state or local level, in strengthening the grid for both power, utilities, building codes. I mean, the energy is a significant cost center coming. And anytime, either it's after a storm or anytime that grid goes down, clearly our reliance on ourselves or our own generators, we certainly went through that in Puerto Rico for an extended period of time as well, is huge. And huge kudos to Florida for investing the way the state and the locals have in the past 25, almost 30 years now. Going forward, that to me, it remains the number one challenge, is seeing what can be done to the best of our ability during these storms to try to get back online as quickly as possible. Why do I say that? Very often, a Walmart is the first or one of the very first locations, I won't even say stores, but locations that resumes normal operations. That's a big deal for people who are living in some sense of, if not chaos, extremely poor conditions. And so bringing back that sort of sense of normalcy and what that means as far as a point in where food distribution, water distribution, I mean, everything that goes to emergency operations is critical. We value our partnership with the State Emergency Operations Center, the localities, but ultimately the more that could be done in Florida, not just within the state, but in showing leadership to other states, would have a real interest in pursuing that.
Yeah, I actually had that on my list, Eric, specific to the power grid. You know, when you generally think about, reliability, right? You want to be able to access it when you need it, but really talking about what is the role of resiliency. Clearly, in a state like Florida, severe weather will continue to play a factor. So how you build a system that doesn't just focus solely on reliability, but weighs in other factors like resiliency. I'd say just maybe nationally, to zoom out, Ryan, a bit, when we look at the electric vehicle infrastructure nationally, really looking at the regulatory frameworks, which are federal, but also at the state and local level. What are the economies of scale? So what are the policies, the investments needed to get that to market? If you think about solar technology, kind of back in the day, what is that tipping point where you might need that government investment to help scale up before that private sector jumps in? And looking at standards, open standards, is something that we're really focused on, which again, you can kind of zoom out nationally, but then if you were to focus in certain cities, many of the Race to Zero Florida mayors, as they're deploying EV infrastructure, making sure ratepayers, utilities, local planning departments, and the technology providers all in that ecosystem have a seat at the table and are coordinating to see how you design and implement those programs in the most comprehensive way, and also looking at things like equitable distribution so that everyone has access to that charging infrastructure as we see more and more EVs come online. And then I couldn't get through a session talking about Florida and mayors without talking about just the role of public-private partnerships. I think when I worked for Mayor Dyer, that was in his mantra. When I was at UCF in undergrad, that was a big thing of, rolling up the public-private industry partnerships for universities. And at Siemens, it's kind of an underpinning of the role of industry, government, and academia too. And in Florida in particular, it's one of Siemens' key markets nationally. And we look at how we work with local governments, county governments, utilities. That common thread is really bringing industry and government together to tackle some of the most unique challenges that governments are facing, and how we can use technologies and bring to bear the right solutions.
Thank you. Just hit on so many things that I wish I could follow up on all of them. But one of the ones that you mentioned how local government can be supportive, but sometimes also, and I kind of heard this through your talk without, I don't think you said these exact words, but it can also be about local government just getting out of the way, letting the private sector do what it needs to do to innovate and be a part of the solution. And what I think is great is, I will say also in regarding Florida's efforts towards resilience, and you both hit on this, but Florida's commitment with the policies they develop to try to find uniformity in policy so that it's easier to digest for the private and public sector, and to implement that way. And there's not as much confusion, and there is certainty where it's possible, but also recognize there's unique community needs and unique resilience issues there. So it's all really important when you're looking at how to develop policy in a state and across the country. I want to shift quickly to the federal level. We've obviously seen a bipartisan infrastructure bill moving throughout Congress. It's passed the Senate. Pretty amazing, and I'm just going to editorialize for 1/2 second and say it's pretty awesome to see something done at a bipartisan level at this capacity in terms of the bipartisan infrastructure package. Not touching on the reconciliation package because that's not quite as developed. It's a little bit more political and controversial, but there's a lot of detail in the bipartisan infrastructure package. And, I guess a lot of it is moving beyond what we typically would call infrastructure, or what most Americans would call infrastructure. And that's, roads and bridges and whatnot. But now it's about the power grid. It's about the manufacturing sector and more. Bree, can you talk maybe a little bit about what your company sees in the bipartisan infrastructure package, or what you see for infrastructure possibility in the future that you really like and are supportive of?
Sure, happy to. So we share in that broader view of what is the definition of infrastructure, and at the highest level, really about bringing together, going to say it again, public and private sector, but to really shape a future that's more sustainable, more resilient, and more equitable. And when you look at, everything from bringing transit and rail, putting that on a playing level with other modes of transportation and funding it. Obviously in Florida, we've got Brightline, and looking forward to seeing that expand and grow. So again, all examples there on transit and rail. But we've talked about this, bringing a new era of electric vehicles. Ryan, you've hit it too, modernizing the power grid, and how to connect that grid even to smarter buildings. And then looking at the opportunity to really prioritize what we're calling the digital transformation. And that could be in a manufacturing environment. It can be for other vital industries, but to really find what are those digital tools that can really sharpen US competitiveness, and help prepare us for the next crisis. Honestly, there were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of things that were even funded out of earlier federal spending packages in response to COVID-19, shoring up our supply chains. Siemens software was actually used to retrofit some of the factories here that were used by automakers to pivot to quickly use digital files and pivot the plant floor to manufacture ventilators at one point in the height of the COVID crisis. In general, whether I think we've gone from the bipartisan infrastructure framework to the bipartisan infrastructure deal. It's the Investment and Infrastructure Jobs Act now, but whatever iteration, seeing bipartisanship, seeing a funding strategy to really encourage US investment, and produce a stronger outcome for our country. I mean, that's really what we're excited and enthusiastic to see, and one that is driving the US leadership in terms of a green economy, which is why we're here today. So.
Hey, Ryan, not too much to add. Bree said it very well. Walmart certainly supports the bipartisan effort. And I think it was a Business Roundtable who came out with a study that showed every $1 of investment for the bipartisan deal should result in about $4 worth of value over a 20-year period. So I think just the sheer competitive nature of a diverse package has become more recognized on a bipartisan basis.
Hey, and Ryan, just one thing to add. Eric brought up the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and that's actually a group we partner with as well. And at the end of last year, we actually did a survey of America's mayors, and some of the key takeaways really talking about investment and prioritizing technology upgrades for their city, and they unanimously agreed they'd like to see industry and the tech sector really have a role and a seat at the table in helping build what that future looks like for modernizing infrastructure. So I think, when we think about this group here today and those that have joined us, just that kind of responsibility of how we can activate these public-private ecosystems to really further take the investments that Eric just spoke about, that return, related to infrastructure and in terms of sustainability goals.
Thank you. Next question. I'm trying to kind of pick through time and look what we have left on my agenda and see if there was any additional questions in the chat that we haven't covered. But something that you both brought up today that I think is a really interesting part of the conversation that often I think gets left out in normal discussion about business operations around clean energy and decarbonizing, and that's supply chain. It's very easy to see how a company can make their own decision about either targets or goals or how they're going to change their operations to meet those goals. But how do you each, in terms of your companies, work through your supply chain to actually help achieve some of the aggressive goals that I think you have, which are great and they're admirable for not only your own company, but then for the supply chain itself? I think that's just a part of the conversation we don't hear much about, but obviously there's got to be some sticks and some levers, and there's all kinds of different ways to get your supply chain probably where you want it to be. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I cannot quote chapter and verse on this, but I'll just, a shorter answer will be, it's a process. I think it's a process that depending on the company and the product, the relationship ultimately comes down to the sort of having the same realization of ROI that we did, and making sure that it is a net positive for the supplier and for ourselves. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that's always the easy to do. It's not. But I think with over 3,100 folks who have signed on to Project Gigaton, I think ultimately there's some real proof there as far as the success of it. But it's a conversation that simply starts with sort of a recognizing where each business is at, and then what those long-term goals are. And to be frank, the only way I can answer the question, it really depends on the supplier, how that kind of goes out. And so we try to bring clearly some consistency to how suppliers go through the process, but I can't speak for the suppliers themselves. And so that's almost a topic unto itself.
Yeah, and I'd say from a Siemens perspective, earlier this year, we launched what's called the degree model. And it's really about an integrated approach to decarbonization efforts, ethics, governance, resource efficiency, supply chain, equity, sort of the whole gamut if you think about ESG commitments. And specific to supply chain, our goals, it is an evolution, it's a transformation, as Eric said, and it's about, I think, how you can work with your suppliers. I mentioned in the US, we have 20,000 US suppliers, but bringing them along on the journey and helping to build capacity. I think it's going to be an evolution. It is a bold commitment and a bold vision, but at the same time, like this is where the world is heading, right? I mean, this is even our customers. We've made these commitments, but utilities, I mean, you're seeing also now from supply chain or for contract requirements, not just public sector with minority contracting requirements or diverse business requirements. You're seeing more and more private sector companies doubling down in that space as well. So I think when you big picture look at supply chain around decarbonization, but also equity, a huge focus for Siemens, and I'm excited to be on the journey with them through that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I think, and to Eric's point, it is one of those things that it's a topic unto its own, but it is such an important conversation because it's so easy for us to look at one aspect of it, and not realize that we are all dependent upon all of these other companies and parts of the supply chain that actually feed into one big, larger ecosystem that way. So, really great discussion there. I want to start to wind down now at this point. We're getting close to the end of the hour. And I'd like to give each of you just an opportunity to kind of sum up and share maybe, I'll ask it in a question, but also just give you the chance to kind of, frame it from your corporate perspectives on climate, clean energy, and carbon reduction. But Walmart and Siemens, obviously large organizations, large, access to resources, to be able to pull off these ambitious goals and plans and hire the right people to do this. Is there a place where companies that are not resource heavy as yours are, or they're just smaller organizations, but they're looking to make a change? Are there places online where the general business community can actually go and learn a little bit more about what your individual company's climate goals are or clean energy procurement goals are, in an effort to share and maybe lead out, in the case of being some of our largest employers in the country?
I mean, from a Siemens perspective, sure. We've got Siemens.com, our global site, or our USA.Siemens.com. We're very transparent and open about our commitments, but also really about our technology portfolio and the know-how, how we can support industries with their sustainability goals, or to be a part of a preferred supplier with Siemens. So honestly, I would say online is the place to go. We also have other associations, whether it's construction related or procurement related or sustainability, which would all be good entry points. So maybe that's a follow on to attendees. We could share some of that information with you, Ryan.
That'd be great.
I guess two things occurred to me at the macro level as far as larger knowledge. On an annual basis, we publish our sustainability report, which is an interesting read. It is not a dry read. And so, yes, online, as far as where we're at on a year-to-year basis on the journey I described a little bit today, I think the important thing in these reports is, while most folks always want to emphasize what's going right, is being transparent about where you're falling short and how you're not making progress. And I truly believe we've done a good job of holding ourselves accountable for what has not gone as well, or where we feel like we have to make up some ground until we get to the certain goal that we had year-wise. But I would say just to Florida. So while I'm based in Florida, I have the Eastern US. I have two people I work with who are based here as well in-house, one up in Tallahassee and one down in South Florida. I've actually, during our chat today, had a couple of people hit me up on LinkedIn. So if it's either finding me directly, Eric Brewer, just Walmart, eric.brewer@walmart.com. Shoot me your note, get a hold of Ryan. But if there's something going on in Florida at the local level or municipal level or state level that you want us to be aware of or partner with, again, I'm all ears. I'm more than happy to figure out what's going on and see if it's something that's of interest to us that we can be helpful with. And more than happy to take any kind of inquiries or thoughts along that path. Lord knows we have folks in Florida who are smarter than I am when it comes to what's going on and how they can help. And I'm happy to tie you in with those folks to figure something out.
That's great. Thanks to you both. I appreciate it. This was not only for me an enlightening conversation, but I think it was a really good look into two major corporations, the United States, especially with the Florida presence they have, and what you're both trying to do as far as an organization to be, less emissions heavy. You are obviously looking to affect change across not only the state, but across the country, globally for that matter. And all of us can learn from what you are doing as companies. So thank you very much. Appreciate both of you joining today's webinar. I also want to say thank you again to the Florida Race to Zero campaign for setting this conversation up today and hosting it. If you want to reach out to any of us, please, again, I think Eric just shared his contact information in the chat. But you are also welcome to email me at revans@chambersforinnovation.com, and I'm happy to connect you to both our speakers and or other resources that might help as you look to pursue goals or answer questions related to this conversation today. So again, thank you to you both. Thank you to the Florida Race to Zero. Remember that this is Clean Energy Week, so please, watch for social and try to help gain some exposure for the incredible transformation that's happening to our clean energy economy across this country and across the world. So thank you all and take care.